Yossi Cohen was the director of the Mossad, Israel's national intelligence agency, for 5.5 years. During his tenure, Israel conducted some of the most daring operations against Iran's nuclear infrastructure. He rose through the ranks of the organization for 38 years, and among his various roles, recruiting and handling spies in foreign nations. He was also Israel's national security advisor and the chief Israeli official in charge of managing Israel's clandestine relationships with Arab nations, deeply involved in the Abraham Accords. It was reported in the past that Netanyahu saw Yossi Cohen as the man who would eventually, one day, succeed him in the Likud. That relationship has grown colder since, but that does not deter him from contemplating maybe entering the political arena. Many see him as the man who will one day be Israel's prime minister. That was a long introduction. Yossi Cohen, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much, Yonit, for having me this morning.
I have to begin with, try explaining this to me if you can. As head of the Mossad, I think you oversaw one of the most daring operations that we know of. Mossad agents breaking into the secret Tehran warehouse, retrieving the Islamic Republic's nuclear files, essentially its nuclear military plans. How did we manage to do that 2,000 kilometers away? Well, we couldn't manage to figure out what Hamas is doing 100 meters from the border, right under our noses.
Right. I believe this is one of the biggest problems and one of the biggest questions that we do have till today. I mean, before the end of the war, I think that these questions will be not completely answered by us citizens, and I'm a private citizen, but I have to refer to what I've done in my past in order to try and explain your very deep and important question. How did that happen to us? I think that if you go back to part of what we did at the Mossad, I never did anything alone. I had thousands of subordinates, working with me, very brave men and women working in undercover in very tough countries. We're all based on one very, I would say, essential topic, which is we don't know everything. We know that we don't know. And when you deal with intelligence, every time you deal with intelligence, when you read reports, you have to know that you don't know everything about everything. You know something about something, or you know something about the puzzle, and there are some pieces in the puzzles that are missing. And this is something that has to be all the time remembered when you deal with tough operations that are 2,000 or 3,000 kilometers away from here, or maybe longer than 3,000 kilometers away from here. Same story applies, I believe, for the story in the I would say borders neighboring our country, and this is something that, to me, as an intelligence officer, I have to admit, hard to explain. The distance matters a lot. I mean, we don't fly above other countries as frequent as we can do above, let's say, Lebanon, according to reports, and some, of course, above Gaza Strip. We don't use as many relationship, and we don't share, the same borderlines as we have physically with this Gaza Strip, which is eventually a very well placed advantage to the hands of Israel. Mm-hmm. So it makes the answer a little bit even more complicated. One, I believe that, as you've mentioned, being the national security advisor, you have to know that a nation has two lines of defense. The first line of defense is the intelligence. You have to know what the enemy is planning for you. And we have to be there alerting ourselves first, and then the army, and then eventually the what we call the war cabinet, or any cabinet that is eventually in a position or should be in a position to take a very serious decision about the enemy plans. What do we do with it? Are we aware of that? Do we learn that only? Do we keep the intelligence for ourselves, or do we disrupt what we see? Mm-hmm. The Gaza case is a very sad story. Mm-hmm. I think that if I go to the bottom line after this maybe too long explanation, is that we didn't have enough intelligence, probably. And we didn't have enough intelligence amid to the non-distance existence in between us and them, that many Gazan people have entered Israel. I'm not sure what we've done with them. Have we recruited part of them? Did we have enough human intelligence? Did we have enough sources, SIGINT sources? I'm not sure that we had enough of all that. The result says that we may had two failures. One, we didn't have enough. Two, we translated what we had wrongly. Both are an option.
Well, I'm reminded of the report that followed 9/11, that 9/11 commission, and it said this wasn't only a failure of intelligence, it was a failure of the imagination. That had been the big strategic mistake. And in this case, it looks like that for this reason. And I wonder if you see it this way, which is that people making the decisions couldn't imagine that Hamas were plotting this because they believed in the so-called concept, the conceptia, that Hamas were deterred, that the Palestinians had become essentially irrelevant, that the focus now was on the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia. And therefore, even if there was good signal intelligence and human intelligence, they weren't putting those pieces together because of that failure of the imagination. What do you make of that view?
Right. Well, learning about what has happened at the 9/11 now, and I, for many years, I mean, Yonit mentioned that I'd been working internationally with my counterparts too, at the CIA, the FBI, and of course, the international intelligence agency that was eventually created after the failure of the 9/11. And what they have told us, I mean, at the beginning, is that they a little bit envy the Israeli system, because the Israeli system, I mean, think about us. I mean, we're small, we're a little bit tight in between ourselves. So the relationship normally in between our local FBI, the Shabak, Mossad, the IDF intelligence are super close. I mean, we live in the same neighborhood. I mean, we are like hundreds of meters or maybe a few kilometers one from each other. And we do share into one, we call it a pool, all intelligence from all bodies, except maybe very, very, very sensitive sources that would not enter into that pool, but will be shared in a discrete manner. 9/11 eventually was not about imagination. It was like they didn't see the pieces together. I mean, probably one of the bodies saw the borderlines. One of the bodies saw what's going on in the training facilities of trained pilots, and these that eventually took the aircrafts and crashed it into the buildings. The other part saw maybe the immigration department, and they didn't have an American full view, full picture about the intelligence they probably had. And that's the American problem. I'm not sure. Well, imagination is an important asset. In operations, you have to be imaginative. I mean, in order to get somewhere, you have to visionize it. You have to say, I know it's beyond the mountains of imagination, or behind a lot of barriers. Like Yonit mentioned, I mean, the seas of the nuclear archive. That was beyond imagination in a way, but we imagined that. We wanted to get there. So it's not only about a vision, it is what do we do to get into that mission? And we had very few people in Iran on that case that were partnering on that very discreet Iranian MOD, Ministry of Defense, mission to hide their filthiest secrets about the nuclear bomb. And we knew about that. I think that the problem of Gaza is, again, imagination was there. I think that many reports claim, or some, according to the Israeli media and others, I mean, I saw some, American media, including, I think, New York Times and stuff like that, reporting that they knew. So they have imagined something like this that could have happened, but they ruled it out. They said, maybe we can imagine that, but that's too imaginative. Okay, so we disclose. I mean, we ignore that in a way. I mean, think about what has happened. I mean, on that very holiday of ours. I mean, Sukkot and Simchat Torah and October the 7th. Intelligence is coming in. Eventually, it was alerted, right? I mean, it is alerting. I mean, part of our very important generals. I mean, including, I believe, the chief of staff and chief of Shabak, and so everybody's saying something's happening. It is
in the night between Friday and Saturday.
Between Friday and Saturday, 3 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. There is something's coming up, and nevertheless, it was. I mean, imagination said it may. Reality says it will not. And you're right, Jonathan. Imagination won. Theirs, not ours.
No,
Yes, theirs.
sadly.
Unfortunately.
Sadly, it was theirs.
I hope I answered your question. I mean, it's.
Well, my point in a way was just that the conception had been that Hamas is deterred, and therefore people weren't on their guard. That's
only part of the conception. I mean, I think that, well, I think it has to be understood or explained that in between nations, the last thing that they want to do is a war. In between country and terror organizations, I believe the last thing that they want to do is a war. I mean, you don't want to conduct a war if you don't have to. I mean, this is something that I believe all countries are trying. By the way, 10 years earlier, prior to this attack, we had Protective Edge, Tzuk Eitan in Hebrew. Protective Edge was not a wanted war. What we've tried to do is the other way around. I mean, we've tried to convince the Hamas not to enter into another round of violence in between us and them, and the entire thing was ignited because of the
abduction of 3 teenagers.
Exactly,
right?
the abduction of the 3 boys, and we were looking for the 3 boys in Judea and Samaria. Okay, we were looking for them there. Of course, we had to arrest some Hamas people. We have to go into their houses, into their commands, whatever. And Hamas in Gaza said, we don't like what you're doing, the Judea and Samaria, so why don't we attack you a little bit with rockets? We said, don't come in, and they did. So we had to go in. But that was like a kind of a thing to explain that we did not rush to a war. I mean, we do not like to have kind of an open conflict if we don't have to. So it's not a concept that I believe is to be designated to our local Hamas-Israeli conflict. It is a worldwide thing. If you don't have to fight, don't fight. One of the director of the CIA, we've mentioned the Americans, when I complained about us not doing enough, all right, about our own systems, she said, probably, Yossi, your systems of generals are like ours. They don't like to fight. And this is, I'm not sure if it's a global thing, but there is a kind of a conceptual theories that would say, let's try to live peacefully with them. Let's try, because war is a tough thing and not all the time wanted.
But isn't that exactly part of the mistake? I mean, you had a significant role in that, creating that infrastructure that allowed the transferring of money from Qatar to Hamas, because we thought they don't want war. We thought the right thing to do was to placate them and to convince them that if they have a life of more prosperity, they will not want war. Well, we didn't want war, but they did. So looking back on that, was that a mistake in your mind?
For sure it was. And not because of us. I mean, because, I can't blame terror organizations for being terrorists, right? Yeah. I can fight them till the last one of them or being killed. But the thing is that we were trying to, as you whatever, wrongly or correctly call it the concept. The concept was to try to split, make it a pure split in between Hamas as a terror organization controlling by force the Gazan people and the Gazan people as a different sector. Like two different departments in our own brains. One says, let's try to help the poor Gazan people. That was the main target of these deliveries. By the way, the Qatari money, I'm sure it's going to be asked, so let's do it right now.
I did actually ask about the Qatari money, didn't I? Specifically,
right?
Yes.
And I was part of being in touch with countries that are not in touch with us. By the way, the Qataris were not the only ones being persuaded by me to donate money to the Gazan people.
Interesting.
Okay. They were not the only ones, right?
Do you want to tell us who else was?
So, I'm sorry.
Do you want to tell us who the others were?
I don't think I could tell you this now, right now. But one day I will, Yonit, I promise, Jonathan too. The thing is that we were trying to help the Gazan people, and the only thing was very well controlled. This is what we believed by our Shabak, and we had a list of people: doctors, nurses, drivers, teachers. All these social workers. We believe that they should receive the money to make Gaza a better place for them, okay? While ignoring or not separating enough Hamas as a terror organization from all that. So in no way we have delivered money to Hamas. Never we did, okay? And the mitigator in between, remember the famous El Amadi, they called him the Qatari ambassador. He came over. His job was to enter Gaza Strip again and again and again, and to make sure that this money will be eventually spreaded or donated to the right people. Hamas as Hamas took over this money too, okay, and probably confiscated it in a very brutal way to his use. But that was not the only thing that the concept did. Hundreds of trucks a day, 20 to 30,000 employees, workers coming through our borders. Thousands are crossing Israel to go to Allenby Bridge to cross over to Jordan so it can go out abroad. Partially they go to train in Iran and in other places too around the world. Partially, I mean, there are students or people that are wanting to do the Hajj or other stuff. I mean, in Jeddah, in Makkah, and so forth. So the concept was, I believe, the concept was a very important, intensive trying for, I would say, coexistence. In fact, passages were open all the time, every day, back and forth. They were coming in, we were going there, not Israelis, but we were there. I mean, look at the list of organizations that were busy under this concept, not because of us, because the world pushed us to do it. I mean, USAID, you know what the size of USAID help in Gaza? UNRWA. I mean, look at what we found about them, not surprising, right? But we had found, I mean, dozens of organizations, Turkish ones, Norwegian ones, European ones, EU ones, whatever. I mean, American ones and others. I mean, all UN, whatever bodies. I mean, UNICEF and more, pushing Israel to let them help the Gazan people. That was not meant to help Hamas. Nobody wanted to do that. Neither the state of Israel. Unfortunately, that was a mistake. By the way, it was a short period of time in which the Qatari money entered and stopped, or whatever. I thought it should be stopped. And I told my opinion not only secretly, but openly too, at your important channel. So I believe that part of the concept is to be understood that as we see it today, what do we see today? Do we see today that under the unwanted humanitarian crisis, and of course, personally, I'm not in favor of any humanitarian crisis, not here, not elsewhere. I'm quite a liberal person, and I want any civilian, anyone around the world living correctly, if he's not a terrorist or is not threatening the state of Israel or any other citizens around the world. But what do we see today? There is a huge international pressure on humanitarian aid. Would that go to Hamas? Could you guarantee that the bread that goes in, or the medicines that go in, the medical equipment, the hospitals, can anyone guarantee, the French, the Jordanians, the Americans, can anyone guarantee that the aid that is being either passing through the crossings or being parachuted by airplanes from above, can you guarantee that this will not help terrorism? Could you guarantee that something that goes in will eventually go only to the innocent part of Gaza? And there's a lot of innocent part of Gaza, right? Of course we cannot. Nevertheless, we have to do it.
You've mentioned the series of mistakes at different levels, some 3 years ago, some more recent. Is it conceivable to you that those mistakes were only made by the various intelligence chiefs, people doing the job you did in the past, or military chiefs, and that the Prime Minister himself was not responsible for any of those mistakes? Is it plausible that they're all responsible for what happened, the failures that led to October 7th, and he is not responsible?
I can't speak about other people's responsibility, not because I can't, because I don't want to. I think that, and I referred to that in the past too, I think that responsibility is being taken by you when you sign up into your new job. Okay, like now you are responsible together with your team about this, the success of this podcast. Okay, no one out of the room could be. I mean, when you entered this, I mean, when you open the camera, that's your responsibility that this will fly nicely, right? When I was nominated to be director of the Mossad, I felt a huge responsibility from day number one. I remember the first morning. It was January the 6th. I'm about to receive thousands of people under my responsibility. Everything that happens to them because of my leadership is my responsibility. I mean, it has nothing to be negotiated here. It's not negotiable. Responsibility is nothing to be either split or to be given by someone else to you. You are taking it when you entered the office. I think that applies strategically to everybody. It is true to a bus driver. I mean, he doesn't have to have a responsibility given to him by someone. When he enters the bus and he has 45 kids, okay, running in between whatever, the tough streets or or whatever roads that can be eventually of danger, I mean, he is responsible. The only one.
So between the lines, you are saying to us the Prime Minister is responsible for what happened on October the 7th.
I would say that everyone should crucify a little bit himself, judging himself openly, and decide by himself if he is responsible or not. I'm not going to blame or to charge anyone with responsibility if he's not capable of doing it by himself.
If you were prime minister at the time and this colossal failure happened, would you stay prime minister?
I think that now it is not the time to discuss changes of the government. I think it is too early to judge what has happened, even though I refer to failures. But I truly believe that a major change should happen after the war. I think that two things should happen. One is the investigating committee that should be the deepest ever. I mean, because we cannot allow ourselves that another thing like that would happen never again. And when I say never again, as we said about the Holocaust, we mean never again, okay? Nothing like this could happen, not with Hezbollah, not with Hamas, not with the Iranians, not with any other existential or non-existential threat that may happen to the state of Israel should not happen. And
so an official state's inquiry. Okay, that should happen.
Absolutely. And the second thing is the results of it. And the results of it should be, I believe, that after so many people have taken their responsibility already, they eventually will be replaced. And I think that the politicians should take a very important step towards a big change in the Israeli arena from now on.
That means elections, right?
That means elections, I believe.
You said there shouldn't be a change until the war is over. There are some who believe that because of that thinking, the people making the decisions, including the person at the top, Prime Minister, therefore has an incentive for the war not to be over.
I can't imagine.
Puts off that moment.
I listen to this argument. I mean, frequently. I say, I don't think that this is a fair argument to claim the government of wanting the war to continue just because of their political resilience. All right, I don't think that this is something that should be claimed. I think that they would be very cautious on continuing even one unwanted or unneeded day of war because of political reasons. I can't imagine that is the case. Nevertheless, the people of Israel today are in a very tough situation, I have to admit. I mean, it's hard. It touches every one of us. It touched my family, probably yours too, and other people that we know. I mean, we have casualties, we have people being kidnapped and tortured and raped and all that, and we know them. I mean, I'm still dealing with the hostages' families. Like yesterday, I had a very important meeting with one of the families that have lost most of their brothers and sisters, and that hurts. I think that starting a kind of a political campaign while dealing with it is asking us Israelis for too much. I know, and I see the voices and demonstrations and everything. We will still have time to change the government and to change responsibilities and to change commanders and command generally, I mean, above the entire Israeli arena when the time comes. I don't think that will take longer than a few months. But within a few months, yes, I'm absolutely in favor of going into a big change.
And are you in? Are you going in?
I haven't decided yet to go in.
You haven't decided. What's your deadline? Because obviously there are going to be elections soon.
I don't have a deadline because I'm not holding the timers. I mean, nobody knows really how long the war would be and what's going to be the outcome of the war. I hope that we're going to win the war. I hope that we're going to bring home all hostages, which is, to me, vitally, not only to me, to us, vitally important. I think that everybody should demand that from the government by all means. And not only from our government, from the Qatari government, from the American government, from the American administrations, from everybody that is dealing with it, from the Arab nations too. But we don't know when all that eventually will be over. So it is super hard, even personally, to predict.
But just to
When you say,
sorry, Jonathan.
yeah.
No, you.
No, on this, I was just going to say, when you say you haven't yet decided, What does it depend on? What are the sort of forces that will make you able to make that decision?
First, I mean, the one should decide if he wants to go into this very
Quagmire. The word
Ye-
quagmire comes to mind.
exactly, and this is
Swamp.
well, I'm not sure, but you know what, I prefer to say that instead of looking at that as a political decision, I should refer to that as a leadership decision. Should I or shouldn't I believe that I want to be part of what is so much needed within the Israeli people and be part of the leadership? And this is a decision that I and my family we have to take. And it's a very deep discussion. I'm not saying that we ignore that. I listen to the audience. I listen to my friends and my family, and I know I can understand part of the expectations.
Mhm.
But it has to be a very. It's not a tough decision, though. It is a decision that has to be practically done, and to go to plunge into
Mhm.
this whatever swamp you said.
Mhm.
Maybe you're right. I mean, it's a big decision. You know what? Because of, again, one thing. It's huge responsibility. It's not a game. I'm not doing it for me, as I did for almost consecutive 42 years. The army then, almost back to back at the Mossad. I served the country. I didn't. I'm not. Was not expecting the country to serve me in return. That was one-sided thing. I'm there to serve the country and the people of Israel, or the Jewish people, or in many times, like in the UK case. I mean, we were there to save British lives too, in many ways. And the cooperation that I had with the MI5 and the MI6, the James Bonds, right? I mean, the MI6, it was wonderful at my time, and we shared a lot in order to save people's life without expecting anything, neither from the audience because they knew nothing about what we did, nothing for the country. Beside, at the end of my itinerary, they would say, "Thank you very much for what you did. This is it. This is what we wanted." It is huge responsibility to go into the Israeli leadership, okay, and it needs kind of a very serious decision from myself.
While we're talking, I just think of how many secrets you're still carrying with you. I wish we had time to talk about that. But I want to ask two things again about, I'm sorry that I'm dragging you into politics. First of all, would it be an easier dilemma for you if Benjamin Netanyahu had already been away from the political arena? And are we right to assume that whatever you go, it will be somewhere in the Israeli right or center right?
Well, again, I think it's a hypothetical thing because, as far as I have explained it like a few minutes ago. I don't see any political changes right now in our Israeli system. And number two, I was raised as a whatever liberal, very liberal rightist.
Mhm.
Okay, very liberal. I mean, the very is to the liberal thing.
Mhm.
And I think that I'm a rightist in terms of what or the connectivity in between me and what we have to do when we see a threat to the country. There, I go very right.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm not an extremist, but I go to the right. I would say probably things that Jabotinsky wrote at the time. This is something that I could refer to, right? The real Iron Dome, I mean, in the past, or the Iron Wall. And this is something that I think that I hate. I will be always very, very determined. This is what I did. I fought enemies for most of my years, and I am planning to do that if will be responsible for that. I mean, in the rest of my time.
Mhm.
On the other things, I'm very liberal. I'm super liberal in the way that the state of Israel should be conducting itself from now on. I mean, human rights, genders, equalities, and so forth. I believe that we have to be very liberal in between us Israelis, understanding that we're different. And we're so different and so colored, like in so many shades. There's so many things that has to be eventually um, understood in between ourselves first. So we have to be liberal enough to be united enough. And
So,
I would say that the State of Israel now is expecting two important things from now on. Two feasts, okay? One is defense and security, which is hugely important. We have to make sure, as we claimed this morning again, that nothing like this would happen again. And on the other hand, we have to unite. We have to understand that we have to kick out, really, I mean, from our society, all these that will try to split us again. I'm very much worried about feast number one and feast number two.
so on just perhaps more in the area of fist number one, in terms of security, the Biden White House and many, many others, in fact, governments all around the world and plenty of people inside Israel, have come to the conclusion that the existence of a Palestinian state is in Israel's own security interest.
Mm-hmm.
That it will, for one, among many other reasons, that it will unlock a regional breakthrough, particularly with Saudi Arabia. That's their position that it's articulated very explicitly now. We know that the current Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, explicitly against the existence of a Palestinian state. Where are you on that question?
Well, first, history changes. I mean, all the time. I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu claimed, I mean, in the Bar Ilan, very famous speech, two-state solution, two states for two peoples. I mean, he claimed that again and again and again and again. And he was traveling sometimes with me to the White House for negotiations and discussions with the Palestinians himself. All right. When I was his national security advisor, or the country's national security advisor, we've conducted negotiations. I mean, by a mediator. His name was Secretary of State Mr. John Kerry, for long months. And we were there trying to get a framework for negotiations to resume talks with the Palestinians so they will have one day a Palestinian state. That was Benjamin Netanyahu thing. I believe that, fast forward to these days, I think that what we're seeing today is a kind of a Israeli audience countering that idea right now. So I know the Saudis very well, according to foreign reports, and not only. I mean, here I am. Okay, I know them very well. I know what they think about the Palestinians. I know what the other Arab nations believe that the Palestinians could do for themselves. Most of them believe that they have used too much their case, but not coming to negotiate for a future state themselves. Instead of that, I mean, they've lost Gaza Strip for another terror organization. That's why they do not have a proper, I would say, elections in Ramallah, so Hamas will not take over what was left of the Palestinian Authority. To negotiate right now a Palestinian state with these non-existence body is not less than ridiculous, or not more than ridiculous. I think it is not, it can't be even done physically, because what we have today is three-state solution. You have a Gazan state which belongs to Hamas, or shortly would not. You have a whatever West Bank or Judea and Samaria state that belongs to us and them together, and we have the Israeli proper state, which is eventually in the middle, like the partition plan from 1947. This is what we have. So where are we going with that? And by the way, it's very interesting to listen not only to the Americans, which I listen very carefully, and I appreciate the American administrations a lot. I don't, from within, I'm bipartisan. Okay, I do care what they think. I do care about their vision about us Israelis, because we're super connected and somehow depend on the American administrations. But I should listen to what the Palestinians want as well. And by the way, I suggest that all of us will have a 3.5 minutes view on Khaled Mash'al's last video after the war. And he said, two-state solution? No way. We will never accept the existence of the State of Israel. So there is a lot of way to bridge, okay, before we go to this claim or statement, let's have a two-state solution and everything will be solved. It has to be eventually differently orchestrated within the Israeli system. I agree. What do we want? Where are we going with all this? How do we promise our kids, and I do have, thank God, kids and grandkids already, how do we promise them that this will be the last war? That's an important responsibility. And number two is, how do you orchestrate the Palestinian Authority as well? I mean, who is there? Do they want to negotiate? Do they really care about the future Palestinian state? Can they do that? Can they bring Hamas under their authorities' wings so they can tell them, okay, now you do what we're telling you? So I think that listening is one thing, being realistic is a different thing. But I think that, Jonathan, you're right. I mean, we have to play differently. I know my good friends, leaders in the Middle East and in America too. I've met personally presidents of the USA. Okay, I mean, definitely Mr. Biden and before that, of course, President Trump and President Obama too. The Palestinian story is all the time there. The two-state solution is all the time there. Everybody's trying to do that. Everybody's trying to not only to push us, but to push them too. Okay, to come and to negotiate for some kind of a solution. I think that when the state of Israel is fighting, okay, against the terror organization who eventually confiscated, I would say, a half, okay, less by territory, but a major stake of the Palestinian future state, we can't really discuss a Palestinian Authority being as one body with the full authorization to create a Palestinian state. But it has to be differently conducted right now.
But in the future, your children, your grandchildren, is the two-state solution the right solution if it's possible in your view?
It depends on many factors that are now, I would say, moving parts. I mean, the moving parts are what's going to be with the future of Gaza. You have 2.2 million people. You have, let's say half of the Palestinian population. What's going to be with this territory? We can't ignore that there is, or there are, not only this factor, but there are a kind of a corrupted Palestinian Authority. There is a kind of corruption on their side. There is a kind of a lack of authority on their side. There is a kind of a unwanting spirit. There is a huge wave, again, of local and incitement from within the Palestinian Authority officially. This has to be changed. They have to accept us as an Israeli Jewish state. I mean, they cannot ignore our existence, not then, not now, not ever. So to go there, all these factors has to be changed. I have to listen, okay, to Palestinian leaders that are saying, forget about Hamas, they do not exist anymore, we don't care about them, okay? Rule them out. I mean, ignore what they had been here, but they're not longer willing and wishing the annihilation or calling the annihilation of the state of Israel, not anymore. This is something of an important and significant statement that we don't really hear. The contrary is so. I mean, part of the Palestinian Authority members are saying, well done, Hamas. They are right. That's because of the occupation of whatever, from 67 and so forth. I mean, and this is not the spirit to go into one room to discuss a kind of a solution. Are we going to go through a two-state solution one day? Maybe yes, but it has to have a lot of geopolitical, I would say, changes, dramatic changes, not only on the Israeli side, which is eventually needed as well, but on the Palestinian side too. Not ignoring the Americans, though.
Well, the Americans is a whole other topic, but just in your previous roles, you would have very often been asked to give an assessment of how you see things. I would just want to do that exercise here with two things. One is, you talked about Hamas being gone from Gaza at some point. What is your assessment of the extent to which they have been militarily degraded over these last 5 months? The night before we're speaking now, there were rockets over the Galil region of Israel. It's as if they're still there, despite everything that's been thrown at them over 5 months. What's your assessment of their capacity? And the second question is, what's your assessment of the talks about release of hostages and a ceasefire? You've been directly involved in those conversations at an earlier stage. Do both sides, Hamas and the government of Israel, truly want this deal, or is one or both of them sort of shadow boxing because for other reasons which you might tell us, they don't yet want a deal?
Right. I think that if counting on official reports that I receive, Hamas is being dramatically hit by the IDF. This is not the ball game that we know. This is a new ball game. I think that we don't. I think everybody is counting the numbers of rockets being hit the state of Israel recently, and today it's zero, very close to zero. I think that this is a very significant issue to be relayed on the damage that Hamas suffers. And by the way, I'm not sure that the war is going to be over tomorrow.
Mhm.
I think that IDF is planning to continue the war inside Gaza till we'll have a more decisive picture um, rather than assessment. Okay, it goes back to what I think. It has to be eventually mentioned, or it has to be seen that Hamas is no longer the ruler of Gaza Strip. And that goes to their military capacity, that goes to their political capacity.
Mhm.
And this is, I'm not sure that this is the case right now.
Mhm.
We do see them controlling, I mean, the all these lines of trucks that they're eventually again confiscating or robbing away from their own citizens. I mean, we see all that they're still there. They're still. I'm not sure if they kick and leave. I mean, the same way they did in the past, but they're still there. Number two, for the hostages, I want to believe, and I'll push that belief too, that this government of Israel will eventually create the best alternatives for hostages deal.
Mhm.
I hope that this will happen and will happen soon. I mean, the days are super tough in Gaza Strip on day-to-day life.
Mhm.
It is unbelievably tough when you see, I mean, when we have, asked the hostages that were released, I mean, about their um,
Experience what they went through.
experience
Yeah.
in these tunnels and so forth. And winter is hard, and we have to hurry up. We have to hurry up. The prices will be high because the starting point on October 7th was super low. So we're gonna pay, and we have to be ready to pay. I'm not claiming that we have to pay everything, okay, but we will pay a lot, and Hamas knows that. Otherwise, they wouldn't have kidnapped our babies, women, children, kids, men, soldiers, women soldiers, all that. I mean, they've done that because they know us. They know that we will do a lot to release them, and we will.
You know, you're a very busy man, and we reluctantly have to let you go, but I won't do that before I ask for some source of optimism. And as you said, according to foreign reports, you know the Saudis well. Is that the ray of light we're looking for? Is there a chance that we are looking at an option of a normalization that might
Absolutely,
somehow...
yes. Absolutely,
Okay.
yes. I mean, optimism, I want to refer to 2 points with your permission, Yonit. One is, the Saudi treaty. I mean, it was already said publicly. They accept us. They know us. They accept us. Oh, okay, we're dealing with the conditions. I mean, by the way, I think that the major stake of normalization that Saudis are doing is not with us, it's with the Americans. It has to be endorsed by the superpower, right? I mean, it is not only in between us, Israelis, and them, Saudis, whom I know, again, very well. It is in between the three of us. So there's give and takes, okay? So now that we've agreed that we're going into this direction, let's negotiate. And this is what is happening. And I think it is happening for some years now. We're closer than it was like far away again. It's getting closer again. I think that in the end of the road, okay, there is a huge light that would say, yes, Arab nations, best Muslim friends, will be better friends with the state of Israel very soon. Second point of optimism is us Israelis. I mean, I see a lot, millions of super good Israelis that are helping each other, that are supporting each other, that are volunteering all over. Our wonderful commanders and soldiers right now that are doing their best, sacrificing their lives for us to live better. And I think that we had life in Israel. We will have life in Israel for a long time. It will be good in our defense. It will be better in our unity, and it will be good in our socially from within the Israeli people in arena. Our economy will eventually recover, I believe, from this crisis as we've done in other crises in the past. So I'm super optimistic, knowing us Israelis and the Israeli spirit.
I don't want to break the optimistic mood at all. I just want to ask one last
So
thing, just
please,
with your use
please
of the
don't,
word.
That's what he's here
Jonathan.
for.
Leave it
Adds
that
a-
way. It's
I'm
nice. It's
a little
hard
bit of
enough in Tel
cloud.
Aviv. I mean, come on.
A little bit of cloud from London. You mentioned the superpower, and referring to the United States. A lot of people have been very struck by how little power the superpower seems to have. It's very clear they want Israel to stop. Kamala Harris, the vice president, said so.
Mhm.
And yet Israel just is doing what it wants to do, appearing to ignore the pleas from Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Tony
Yeah,
Blinken, and so on.
I mean,
How much
I've
power
dealt,
does America
yeah,
actually
right.
have here?
Okay, I mean, it's well, it's not a question that I should answer, because I think that the level of cooperation that we had between us and the Americans is wonderful. I know them very well. I mean, they do like a lot, they do care a lot about the state of Israel. I mean, President Biden came all the way, and that was so significant, so different, so unique. All right. I mean, these statements that, I mean, physically coming here is a huge thing. All right. Now, you don't really miss up with America, and when he say don't, okay, they do listen to him. I mean, enemies and so forth. So we are listening to the Americans. Nevertheless, state of Israel is sovereign to run its own policy, right? It's in a simple way, it's our war.
Yeah.
Okay,
It's their ammunition and their money, isn't
it's
it?
their ammunition and their money. This is something that I believe, or either will be continued intensively, or eventually will be played differently. But I don't want to offer different games today. I think that you're right. Okay, I mean, when you fly F-35s, you do not produce its spare part by yourself, so you depend. By the way, every country that buys, okay, defense for itself from foreign countries is getting depend in a way on the country that was selling them their ammunition or on other parts. But I trust them Americans to understand us. I trust us Israelis to listen to the Americans, and I trust both ends to know that each of our countries has its own policy to follow, which is not countering the other one, all right? That could go along with just explaining who we are and what we're facing, all right? So demanding, I mean, if America is, I don't think it's true, but let's say it's true that America is demanding us to stop the war, we can't stop the war as long as Hamas is still there, as we said, live and kicking, right? I mean, it has to be eventually totally seized. So how this is being communicated to the American administration, I don't know. I hope it is being communicated rightly, and let's hope that this kind of relationship will continue. UK is important, France is important, other nations in Europe are important. I mean, Latin America is important beside, I mean, these funny statements that we, funny, I mean, it's not funny at all, that we hear coming from Africa is important. I mean, Arab nations are important, but each one of these countries has its own policy. What do? When I run what I called, okay, the discreet high diplomacy, I mean, speaking to leaders around the world about us, Israelis, it has to be explained, what do we do? Nevertheless, we did what we did, and we signed peace treaties with 4 countries simultaneously, okay? We can't say that they don't like the Palestinians, or they like the Palestinians more than we do, or less than we do. I mean, it's not, I mean, it is, the game was, or the high diplomacy play was to understand who we are. And I had to sweat a lot to tell them who we are, okay? That we are who we really are, okay? And I think that in the end of the day, we're not like happy to have wars or fights. We're trying to deter our enemies from doing that. That's why I think that the Israeli defense systems is using so much of mutual deterrence, who deters whom, and stuff like that, and what do we have and what we don't have, the arsenal we have, the arsenal we don't have, claiming to be having, and stuff like that. So this is something that has to be eventually not only understood to us, ourselves, from within the Israeli system, but to be communicated rightly to other nations too.
Yeah.
Knowing that we have our own policy from time to time.
Communicating rightly is important. Yossi Cohen, thank you so much. This was a fascinating conversation, and thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thank you, Yonit. Thank you, Jonathan. And
thank you, Yossi. Very good to talk to you.
Okay, same here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.